The game stopped when Jimmy Fallon opened a box that contained more than anyone expected. What started as a lighthearted round of Box of Lies became the most emotional moment in The Tonight Show's history. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer about winning or losing. It was Friday night at Studio 6B in Rockefeller Center, and the energy was buzzing with that end-of-week excitement. The Tonight Show audience was particularly lively, ready to unwind with one of their favorite segments. Jimmy bounced around the stage in his signature navy blue suit, his infectious enthusiasm filling the iconic studio where comedy legends had performed for decades. Tonight's guest for Box of Lies was Sarah Chen, a 32-year-old pediatric nurse from Seattle, who had become internet famous for her TikTok videos about making hospitals less scary for children. Her warm personality and genuine care for kids had earned her millions of followers and eventually a seat across from Jimmy. She wore a simple emerald green dress that complemented her kind eyes that held the compassion of someone who spent her days comforting sick children. During the interview segment, Sarah had been absolutely charming, sharing heartwarming stories about her young patients and the creative ways she helped them through difficult medical procedures. Jimmy had been genuinely moved by her dedication, especially when she talked about staying late to read bedtime stories to children whose parents couldn't be there. The audience had fallen in love with her immediately, and Jimmy knew she'd be perfect for Box of Lies. The rules of Box of Lies were delightfully simple, which made it one of The Tonight Show's most popular segments. Two players take turns picking mystery boxes, examining the contents, and then describing what's inside to their opponent. The catch is that they can either tell the truth or lie, and the other person has to guess whether they're being honest. Jimmy had been playing this game for years with countless celebrities, and it never failed to produce hilarious moments. The objects in the boxes were always carefully selected by the production team to be either completely ordinary or absolutely bizarre, creating the perfect setup for comedy gold. "All right, Sarah, welcome to Box of Lies," Jimmy announced with his trademark grin, gesturing toward the table laden with colorful mystery boxes. "The rules are simple, but the game is dangerous. We take turns picking boxes, and we either tell the truth about what's inside or we lie. The other person has to figure out if we're being honest." Sarah laughed nervously, her hands clasped together in her lap. "I have to warn you, Jimmy, I'm terrible at lying. Working with children teaches you to be honest about everything." The audience chuckled appreciatively, already rooting for the sweet nurse who dedicated her life to helping others. "That might work in your favor," Jimmy replied with a theatrical wink. "Sometimes the best lies come from people who never lie. But first, let me show you how it's done." He reached for a medium-sized blue box from the back row, shaking it gently near his ear as if trying to decode its contents through sound alone. Jimmy opened the box and peered inside, his eyebrows raising dramatically in that exaggerated way that had made him famous. "Okay, Sarah, here's what's in this box," he began with mock seriousness. "It's a rubber duck wearing a tiny sombrero, and it's sitting in a miniature beach chair holding a cocktail umbrella." The audience erupted in laughter as Jimmy held up the box, showing Sarah but keeping the contents hidden from everyone else. His description was so absurd, and yet delivered with such conviction that it was impossible to know if he was telling the truth. This was exactly the kind of ridiculous scenario that made Box of Lies so entertaining. Sarah studied Jimmy's face intently, looking for any telltale signs of deception. "You know what, Jimmy? That's so weird that it might actually be true. I'm going to say you're telling the truth." The audience held its breath as Jimmy slowly turned the box around to reveal its contents. Inside was indeed a rubber duck wearing a tiny sombrero, sitting in a miniature beach chair with a cocktail umbrella. The studio exploded in cheers and applause as Sarah threw her hands up in victory. "I can't believe I got that right. That was so specific." "Beginner's luck," Jimmy laughed, clearly impressed. "Okay, your turn. Remember, you can either tell me the truth or try to deceive me with an elaborate lie. Choose your box wisely." He gestured toward the remaining boxes with the dramatic flair of a game show host. Sarah's eyes scanned the collection of mystery boxes, each one a different color and size, each one holding unknown possibilities. Finally, she settled on a small pink box from the front row, something about its delicate color drawing her attention. "This one calls to me," she said with a smile, reaching for the petite container. The moment Sarah's fingers touched the pink box, something shifted in the studio atmosphere. It was subtle at first, nothing the audience would notice, but Jimmy's trained eye caught the slight change in her demeanor. Her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before returning, but it wasn't quite the same carefree expression she'd worn moments before. Sarah lifted the lid of the pink box slowly, and as she peered inside, her face went completely white. The color drained from her cheeks so rapidly that it was visible even under the bright stage lights. Her hands began to tremble slightly, and she stared into the box as if she was seeing a ghost. "Sarah?" Jimmy's voice was gentle, his comedian instincts immediately recognizing that something was very wrong. "Everything okay over there?" The studio audience, sensing the shift in energy, began to quiet down from their previous celebration. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She was transfixed by whatever lay inside the pink box, her eyes filling with tears that she was desperately trying to hold back. Her breathing became shallow and quick, and her free hand moved instinctively to her chest, as if trying to calm her racing heart. "Sarah, what's in the box?" Jimmy asked again, this time with more concern. He could see that this wasn't part of the game anymore. Something in that innocent pink container had triggered a profound emotional response that transcended entertainment. Finally, Sarah looked up from the box, and when she met Jimmy's eyes, tears were streaming down her face. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke, but the studio's microphones picked up every word. These are baby shoes." The simple statement hung in the air like a weight. Jimmy's expression immediately shifted from entertainer to concerned human being, as he recognized the pain in her voice. "Baby shoes?" he repeated gently, moving slightly closer to her side of the table. "They're pink," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "Tiny pink shoes with little white laces and there are small flowers embroidered on the sides." She lifted one of the shoes from the box with shaking hands, holding it as if it were made of the most fragile glass. Jimmy could see now that these weren't just props for a game show. These shoes had meaning, history, weight that went far beyond their physical presence. "Sarah, we can stop the game if you need to," he offered softly, his voice stripped of all performance. "No, it's okay," Sarah said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I need to tell you why these matter. I need people to understand." She took a deep breath, gathering the courage that had carried her through years of caring for other people's children. "2 years ago, I was pregnant with my daughter," Sarah began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Her name was going to be Emma. I had picked out these exact shoes for her, pink with white laces and little embroidered flowers. I bought them when I was 6 months pregnant, and I kept them in her nursery." The studio was completely silent now. Even the production crew had stopped moving, understanding that they were witnessing something far more important than entertainment. Jimmy's eyes were focused entirely on Sarah, giving her his complete attention and support. "But Emma was born too early," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the tears. "She lived for 3 hours, 3 precious hours, where I got to hold her and tell her how much I loved her. These shoes never got to touch her feet." The audience was visibly moved, with many people wiping away their own tears. Jimmy's face showed the deep compassion of someone who understood that some moments transcend television, that some stories need to be told regardless of format or timing. "After Emma died, my husband David and we fell apart," Sarah said, holding the tiny shoe against her heart. "We couldn't figure out how to grieve together. Everything reminded us of what we'd lost. We tried therapy, we tried traveling, we tried having another baby, but nothing worked." Sarah paused, looking down at the shoe in her hands as if drawing strength from it. "6 months ago, we got divorced. It was amicable, but it was devastating. During the settlement, David took Emma's things, her clothes, her toys, These shoes. He said he needed them to remember her by. I haven't seen these shoes in 6 months, Sarah whispered, her voice filled with wonder and confusion. David has them at his apartment. So how are they here? She looked up at Jimmy with an expression that was part confusion, part hope. Behind the scenes, Jimmy made a decision that completely defied every television protocol. He stood up from his chair and walked around to Sarah's side of the table, kneeling beside her chair just as he had done countless times with children in his audience. Sarah, I think someone wanted you to have these back, he said gently. But how is that possible? Sarah asked, clutching the shoe tighter. The production team said these were random objects for the game. How could they know about Emma? How could they know about David? Jimmy looked toward his production team in the wings, and one of his producers stepped forward with a small envelope. This came with the box, the producer said quietly, handing Jimmy the sealed envelope with Sarah's name written on it in familiar handwriting. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the envelope, recognizing David's careful script immediately. Inside was a single piece of paper with just a few lines written in his neat handwriting. As she read the words, her tears began flowing more freely, but they were different tears now. What does it say? Jimmy asked gently, respecting her privacy but wanting to understand what was happening. Sarah's voice was barely audible as she read. Sarah, I know I hurt you when I took Emma's things. I thought keeping them would help me heal, but all they did was remind me that I lost both my daughter and my wife. You were always the better parent, even in those 3 hours. These belong with you. I'm sorry for everything. Love always, David. The studio was completely silent, except for the sound of Sarah's quiet sobs. Jimmy placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering the kind of wordless comfort that transcended any scripted response he could have given. He contacted the show, Sarah said, looking up at Jimmy with amazement. He must have seen that I was going to be on, and he sent these. After 6 months of not speaking, he found a way to give me back the most precious thing we shared. Jimmy's own eyes were filled with tears as he processed the magnitude of what had just happened. Sarah, this isn't just about the shoes. This is about love finding a way, even through the deepest pain. I need to call him, Sarah said suddenly, looking around as if expecting a phone to materialize. I need to thank him. I need to tell him. She trailed off, overwhelmed by the emotions flooding through her. We can do that right now if you want, Jimmy offered, gesturing toward the phone on his desk. Would you like to call David? Here, in front of everyone? It was an unprecedented offer. But Jimmy understood that some moments were bigger than television. Sarah nodded eagerly, clutching Emma's shoes to her chest. Yes, please. I think he needs to know that I understand, that I forgive him, that maybe we can figure out how to honor Emma's memory together even if we can't be married anymore. Jimmy walked to his desk and picked up the phone, a prop that had become real in this moment of genuine human connection. What's his number, Sarah? The audience watched in complete silence as Sarah recited the digits she still knew by heart. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a familiar voice answered, cautious and uncertain. Hello? David's voice came through clearly on the studio speakers. David, it's Sarah, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm on The Tonight Show right now, and I just opened a pink box. Her voice broke on the word pink, but she continued. I found Emma's shoes. There was silence on the line, then the sound of David's sharp intake of breath. Sarah, are you okay? I wasn't sure if the show would actually use them. I thought you should have them back. Thank you, Sarah whispered, holding the phone closer. Thank you for remembering that she was my daughter too. Thank you for understanding that these belong with someone who will treasure them. I never stopped loving you, Sarah. David's voice came through, raw with emotion. Losing Emma broke us, but it didn't erase what we had. I just didn't know how to be around you without falling apart completely. Jimmy watched from a respectful distance as Sarah and David had a conversation that millions of people were witnessing, yet felt completely private. The studio audience was transfixed, understanding that they were seeing something authentic and unrehearsed. "Maybe we can't be married anymore," Sarah said. "But maybe we can be friends who both loved the same little girl. Maybe we can visit her grave together sometimes, or plant flowers in her memory garden." "I would like that," David replied, his voice stronger now. "I miss talking to you, Sarah. Not as my wife, but as the only other person who understood how perfect she was, even for such a short time." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Jimmy and the audience serving as witnesses to a reconciliation that transcended romantic love. It was about shared grief, mutual respect, and the understanding that some losses are too big to carry alone. When Sarah finally hung up the phone, she turned to Jimmy with a smile that was both heartbroken and hopeful. "We're going to have coffee next week. Not a date, just two people who loved the same little girl, trying to figure out how to keep her memory alive." Jimmy nodded, understanding that sometimes the most powerful endings aren't about getting back together, but about finding peace. "Sarah, what you and David just did, that's what love looks like when it transforms into something new but doesn't disappear." The audience rose to their feet in unanimous applause, not the typical television applause, but the kind that recognizes genuine human courage. Sarah stood as well, still holding Emma's tiny shoes, and for the first time since her daughter's death, she felt like she might be able to carry this grief without it destroying her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jimmy said, addressing the camera directly, "sometimes box of lies becomes box of truth, and sometimes the most important games are the ones that stop being games. Sarah Chen, thank you for sharing Emma with us. And thank you for showing us that love doesn't end, it just changes shape." The segment that was supposed to last 8 minutes had stretched to nearly 25. And no one cared about the schedule. The episode aired exactly as it happened, unedited and raw, touching millions of viewers who understood loss, divorce, and the complicated ways that love persists even through devastating circumstances. 6 months later, Sarah and David were indeed friends who met monthly to tend Emma's memorial garden together. They never remarried, but they found a way to honor their daughter's memory while supporting each other's healing. Sarah kept Emma's shoes on her nightstand, a reminder not just of loss, but of the love that brought a estranged couple back to a place of peace and mutual respect. Jimmy kept the pink box from that night in his office, not as a memento of a television segment, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important moments happen when you stop performing and start witnessing the courage of the human heart. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some stories change everything. Share this with someone who needs to remember that love finds a way to survive, even through the deepest loss. Because on that Friday night in Studio 6B, a simple game revealed that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about finding new ways to honor what we've lost, while building something meaningful from the pieces that remain. The game that stopped that night eventually resumed, but it was different. It was deeper, more connected to the truth that sometimes the most important discoveries come hidden in the most unexpected places, wrapped in pink tissue paper and tied with the threads of a love that refused to disappear.